And by thinking about how you can uniquely create value, whether it's for a company or any of these types of things, combined with what you're inherently interested in, is where I believe you can find the most success in whatever that you choose to do.
Hey nerds, Monica here. Welcome to the Data Podcast for Nerds, where we get to talk to amazing professionals and ask them all about how they're using data to solve the world's problems. We're highlighting skills that data professionals use on a daily basis. Plus, we always include some fun bits because we're all nerds here and we love to have fun. So thank you for tuning in, and if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. And as always, folks, happy learning. Today with us, we have Ken G. Ken, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on the show.
No problem. I've been excited about this all week. So, yeah, I'm
Oh,
happy to be
good.
here.
Good. You'll have to excuse my raspy voice and weird hoodie situation in the springtime. I'm a little bit under the weather, so if I sound a little bit weird, hopefully it comes out okay and you can still understand me. But
I'm sure it'll be great. It'll be like the Michael Jordan flu game where he had an exceptional performance when he was sick. So I have no doubts.
okay, this is going to be great then. I'm excited. So we usually start off the show by understanding people's origin stories. So if you could please let us know how you got into data and what's your background.
Yes, I was born January 4th, 1990. No, I'm just kidding. So I really got into data in pursuit of a bigger goal. So I repeat this quite a lot, that data and the skill set associated was a means to an end for me. And then it's a means that I came to really love and enjoy in pursuing a larger vision. So for me, my entire life has revolved around sports and sports performance. When I was trying to play golf myself professionally, something that I found unbelievably valuable was analytics. So when I was in college, I started analyzing my own data, just looking at individual hole performance by type. I started looking at the standard deviations. I started thinking a lot about the marginal improvements I could make in different areas of my game. And that led me to start doing that more comprehensively. So, what other areas could I analyze that could help me in action improve my performance on the golf course? That was really interesting to me through all of college. And then after college, I got really interested in predicting sports outcomes outside of my own performance. So I got really interested in daily fantasy sports. I was trying to optimize and essentially solve that market, which is very difficult. And I realized that I needed additional skills to be able to really build substantive models to be able to tackle that domain. So I started dabbling into coding. I started dabbling into more advanced tools using SQL and things along those lines. I actually interned at DraftKings and I saw all of the suite of tools that people were using there. And I said, oh my goodness, I have to start learning these things. So I went back to get my master's degree in computer science. So I played some golf. Not to get into too much detail, but I tried to play golf professionally. I went back to get my master's in global business. I thought I could pick up some of the skills there to be able to start analyzing. I realized that wasn't sufficient for my ambitions related to model building. And then I went back to school again to get my master's in computer science. All during that, I started working at this company called Scouts Consulting Group, which is where I actually work now. And we're doing consulting for athletes, for professional teams to help them leverage the data that they've collected on their players to help improve their performance. So to me, it's all been in pursuit of that understanding of sports performance. It's all been in that pursuit to understand and to make actionable changes towards improving that performance overall. And again, I sort of fell in love with the process along the way. I started to enjoy coding. I obviously started to enjoy educating around how to break into this domain and how to learn this skill set that there was no roadmap for me to learn when I was going into it. So sort of all came full circle and it all blended together into this interesting thing that I call my life.
That's amazing. Backing up into the origin story, what originally got you interested in golf?
So I played baseball very seriously growing up. I'd also dabbled in golf. Baseball is a team sport, and I didn't necessarily play super well with others. Baseball is a team sport where you also have individual stats, and I cared very much about my own performance. I obviously wanted the team to win, but there's a lot of focus on being a good team player and things along those lines. I didn't think I was a bad team player, but there was a lot of stuff that we were encouraged to do that I didn't see how it would help add to the team winning. And so it was very inefficient in my mind. And golf, I was completely left to my own devices. I could win on my own. And if I won, it was all on me. If I lost, it was all on me and things that I could do better. In other team sports, again, I like playing team sports. I think it's important to be a good team player. I think those are important skills to learn. But there's always an out. There's always, it isn't as concrete what makes the outcomes. In individual sports, it is essentially solely up to you, and particularly in golf, how you play. Even in a sport like tennis or a sport like boxing or jujitsu, your competitor could have an off day, and that could lead to you winning when you didn't necessarily deserve it. Golf is one of those very few sports where it's almost completely objective, where you shoot a score and it's the best that you could do against that essentially line in the sand. Other sports like that might be swimming or running or anything time related, but golf is, I think, one of the very few, if not the only sport that has that complete control over the domain that is not an endurance related sport. It's more of a quote unquote skill type of sport. And I found that very alluring. I found that very interesting that it didn't matter how I got there. At the end of the day, the only thing that mattered was the score on the card. And there's also other elements. I'm 5'9" on a good day. I'm pretty like bulky and things along those lines. But there's a lot of other sports that require that have a limitation on the physique that you have. You think of football, you think of basketball. It helps dramatically to be physically larger. Even baseball, there's a premium on physical size. And I found that golf was a sport that it mattered how far I hit the ball, but how far I hit the ball wasn't necessarily limited by how tall I was, which I thought was very interesting. I mean, Rory McIlroy, who hits one of the furthest on the PGA Tour, is around my size, around my build. And that to me is really inspiring, is that I don't necessarily need as much of the physical gift to be able to compete in this sport. And there's obviously a spectrum across all sports. And in a lot of sports, there is that you can make up for physical differences with skill or with strategy or whatever it might be. But I thought that golf for me was one of the most level playing fields from a physical perspective. From other aspects, for example, the financial side of getting into golf, it is not a level playing field because generally you have to come from a well-off background and things along those lines. But, again, I came from a fortunate spot where that wasn't necessarily the bottleneck. And to me, that was very freeing, is that, okay, in a world where essentially my dedication to the game or the way I thought about it, the way that I trained was the major differentiator. Could I really, what was I capable of in that specific domain?
Mm-hmm. What about bowling? So that sounds a lot similar to golf, where you don't have to be a certain size or a certain type or whatever. It's all yourself contributing to the skills that you have. I grew up playing bowling, and I was on the bowling team for in my high school. So I'm like, what about bowling?
A very similar domain. I agree 100%. I think what I liked about golf is it was outside. And in bowling, there is perfection. So it's feasible, and a lot of people do bowl 300s. I mean, not regularly, but golf, the idea of perfection, it's effectively unattainable. And I sort of liked that there was there was a theoretical limit, but no practical limit to how good you could get. And to me, that was very exciting. There's no ties. You just keep going. And in theory, in bowling, 300 is the complete limit, which I find interesting as well. Not that that's a knock on bowling or anything. It's just, to me, the intellectual exercise of of always grasping was kind of a fun and different endeavor.
Yeah,
And I
that's
cannot pull the
interesting because
300.
it is like a limit, and then it's like you can't get much better maybe unless you like blindfolded yourself or did some like
Yeah.
trick shots or
Or you just did
something.
it over and over again and you bowled, 50 300s in a row, which is almost super unattainable, almost completely unattainable. And there's also there's obviously randomness in golf, but in bowling, it would be so frustrating to me to feel like I did everything I needed to do. I bowled a perfect game and something in the aisle or something along those lines didn't fall perfectly well with the with again not an expert at bowling, but if I felt like I did everything right and semi the randomness of the break or whatever it's called, I didn't I wasn't able to execute in that way. I mean, of course, again, similar things in golf, but it's a little bit more amorphous in golf if you miss the putt or any of those types of things, and it falls on a little bit in a little bit just a different psychological way for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's head into talking about official fun bits. Hey nerd, are you looking for a career in data? I would absolutely love to help you out. I just launched a data career strategy program that helps folks break into data without breaking anything. I provided a link in the show notes if you want to learn more information about it. Now, back to the fun bits. So, we both are podcast hosts, and I want to talk about podcasting. So, what got you into podcasting?
So the initial first podcast I did was an offshoot of my main YouTube channel. So just the Kenji YouTube channel. I thought it would be fun and a really unique way to get additional content to interview people. So if you think about it, a lot of effort goes into making a traditional YouTube video. So I have to think of everything, I have to script everything, I have to shoot it in a specific way, I have to edit it, I have to do all these things. And to be perfectly honest, podcasting is a lot less effort. You can interview someone, and rather than you having to think up this novel idea, the individual person is the novelty. They have their own unique story. They have their unique characteristics. They have things that they like to talk about and that they're passionate about. And the content and the novelty is coming from them. Yes, there's artistry in how you ask questions, but to me, the questions come very naturally through, say, a 30-minute conversation or something along those lines. So it's a lot, it's lighter touch in terms of the content that I'm making. But I also realized that it was a lot more fun than making a traditional YouTube video for me. I'm very extroverted. I love to talk to people. I'm very curious. I love to hear stories. And I was getting that every week, every time that I interviewed someone. I had access to that. And I was also producing content at the same time. So to me, there was a light bulb that shot into my head after probably around 5 or 10 podcasts that I did, that this guiding light sort of told me that I should do more of these. I really enjoy doing this. I like talking to people. It's fascinating for me to hear their stories. It makes good and interesting content. Maybe not as clickable and viewable as some of my other stuff, but to me, the interest and how it satiated my curiosity was even more so than making a traditional YouTube video. So I started just to continue down that path. I split off the podcast into its own thing, and I've enjoyed it ever since. I mean, it's by far one of the most impactful things I've done in my entire life. There's the benefit of, one, improving my interpersonal skills. I love to talk to people. Being able to talk clearly and effectively is something that in every single aspect of your life, whether it's professionally, whether it's in your social life, whether it's in your love life, is a very powerful and important skill to learn. I'll also say from a social and networking perspective, if you have a podcast, you have an excuse to talk to a ton of very interesting people. And I've been able to have conversations with people that, one, I never would have thought to have had, but I've been able to meet people that are incredible friends that have improved the quality of my career and my life and a lot of these other things just through having this platform to be able to bring people on. And I've also learned a lot about myself by spending a lot of time. I think I'm at around 200 podcast episodes. So if each is, let's say, an hour long, it's 200 hours of me just talking, and then after editing, hearing myself talk back. So I've learned a tremendous amount, one, about my mannerisms and things that I like and I don't like. So for example, I hate it, but I say like a lot. I say a lot when I talk, and those things drive me insane. And I'm working to continually scrub those from my vocabulary. But I've also learned a tremendous amount about my view on things, how my thoughts have changed over time, how I've viewed the career differently over time, how I viewed the domain of data science differently over time, and that's been incredible. And then I've also started this new podcast, the Exponential Athlete, recently, which is a major pursuit of passion for me, which is going back to the roots in sports performance. It's not necessarily related to sports analytics at all, but it's just an intensive study where I'm looking into what makes the greatest athletes of all time more successful than their peers. And I've been able to do a very deep study into that, and it's been extremely, extremely fulfilling. So it sort of comes down to podcasting indexes and all the things that I really get excited about. So one, talking to people; two, more now, just deep research into a specific topic and domain, and the ability to understand myself and understand the domain better.
Mm-hmm. So what is, I guess, does the Exponential Athlete have its own origin story?
Yeah, I did a ton of introspection over the last 6, 7 months. So I've been making content on YouTube for almost 5 years now. And a lot of the content was focused on people who are closer to the beginner level, who are a little bit more focused on the job market and things like that. And I realized that the stuff that I do, or I can, the stories that I can tell uniquely well, are not necessarily around that anymore. I haven't been a beginner in the data science space in almost 10 years. I haven't applied to different jobs in probably 5 years. And I haven't interviewed candidates for new roles in 3 or 4 years. So my ability to tell those stories effectively are really not to the level that I would feel that I feel they should be for me to continue to make that style of content. And it's been important for me to realize that and to evolve the content in the way it has. So with the Ken Sniff's Neighbors podcast, for example, I can still interview people. I'm in touch enough with the data domain. I'm still working in that close enough that I feel I can help facilitate other people's stories. For the Exponential Athlete podcast, I feel like that is a story or domain I can tell and explain uniquely well. So first, I still work in sports analytics. I have a foot into the performance game, which is a small subset of people have access to that. An even smaller subset of people have that insight, but are also familiar with content, are comfortable sitting in front of a camera, and are willing to tell the stories in the podcasting medium. If we go even deeper, for each episode or for each series where I'm doing deep dives into athletes, I'm reading 5 to 10 books. I'm listening to probably anywhere between 5 to 15 hours of podcasts and videos and reading articles. I don't think that there are that many people that are interested enough in that domain that they're willing to put in all of that work. So that's another thing that essentially makes, hopefully, that this podcast for me a one-of-one type thing. And then the last thing is, because I do work in sports, I have a very unique relationship with a lot of professional athletes, a lot of coaches, a lot of these different people. So for someone to replicate or to try to do some of the similar storytelling with this podcast, I feel like it's effectively in its own category. Whereas the other podcasts or even the YouTube content, there's so many different people that could tell that story, arguably even better than I could. Maybe not the Ken Sniff's Neighbors podcast, because I've had so many guests and I've really enjoyed that process. And for me, it's fun. I get to interview my friends. But for the Kenji YouTube channel, if people are telling stories or educating around how to break into the field, do some of the beginner tutorial stuff, if they're even talking about the job market, I would argue that almost any data scientist who's been working around 2, 3 years that are still familiar with the challenge of breaking in, but are also relatively new to building the skills and are interested in the evolution of the new tooling and whatever it might be, they could probably tell the story of data science and education in YouTube dramatically better than I could at this point in time. So for me, it was all about, hey, how do I index in the things that I care the most about and that I have the most knowledge about and the most unique individual advantage in being able to create, and just do that, go all in.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I really like your shirt, the brand. It's perfect. I don't know if you came
Yeah.
up with that or if you had somebody help you. The exponential little E at the end, like that's amazing.
Everyone calls it Athlete X. Maybe I'll have to buy some of the rights to that
Mm,
name as well. But I had a lot of fun with it. The idea, it came very natural. Once I had the name, I was like, oh, I know exactly what I want this to look like. And I take a ton of inspiration from some of the podcasts that I really like and listen to. So I love the Founders Podcast, probably my favorite overall podcast. And there's without a doubt some very simple branding that he has that I've paid homage to, and also in the style of the podcast. Even though I believe what I'm doing is a very unique individual style, the case study where I'm studying these athletes is directly borrowed from his philosophy, and then my own spin is that I get to do deep dives or interview people to complement the things that I learn in the case studies. And to me, that paints a more complete picture because I can only know so much. I'm not an expert in motor learning or in human physiology. Yeah, I could talk loosely around those topics, but bringing in an expert to really drill into those is what I'm trying to do. Let's try to create this complete knowledge that's not just from my head, that's coming from a lot of experts as well as the source material, which is the study of these elite athletes.
hmm And do you focus on specific athletes from like a specific sports genre, or is it just kind of all across the board?
I'm trying to do all across the board. What I'm interested in is overall greatness. And after studying athletes from a diverse sports over time and even coaches and things like that, I'll hopefully be able to create a framework or a blueprint for what success in those domains looks like. So the idea is to say, hey, what do all of these athletes have in common that are the greatest in their respective fields? And then on the other side of that, what makes each of them different from each other? And to be able to piece out what are the essentials for success and what are some of the things that individual athletes did that was different that could maybe even push any individual person forward. There's also the other side of that where not necessarily all athletes had super happy lives. You look at a Michael Phelps, and start doing a ton of research into him now. After Beijing, where he won those 8 gold medals, he didn't really love swimming anymore. He had spent all this time in the pool. He dedicated his life to this. There's a downside to being so focused on that specific goal. And so can we learn how to avoid that downside? Can we learn whether it's some of the mental health approaches or tools to be able to mitigate the downside of success while still really enjoying the process and achieving greatness? I think someone that did this really well was Roger Federer. So my series on him is going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And even, Kobe Bryant had some scandals. So Tiger Woods had some scandals. Roger Federer, at least from the research that I've done, seem to have figured out largely how to be hyper successful, but also keep a family balance, to really love the process, to just enjoy every moment of what he was doing. And to me, that's what the goal is to unpack is what can we take from the greatest about performance? What can we take about the greatest about mental health and enjoyment of the process and these types of things so that we can live a successful as well as a metric successful as well as fulfilling life.
hmm What would you say are the most like overlapped or transferable skills that you use from your data life into this new podcasting realm?
So I still fortunately get to use my data skills in my 9 to 5 work in the sports analytics space, which is nice. But there's a tremendous amount. I look at data scientists as problem solvers with a advanced skill set. So a data scientist in work is presented with a problem. Our job is to figure out the most elegant, efficient, useful solution to that problem. And I view this as very much the same thing, except I'm defining the problem statement more frequently. So I'm trying to figure out and create a framework and organize all the things I read into an efficient simplification of success. And a lot of our work as data scientists, in the same way, sometimes solving the problem is just simplifying things and being able to explain it to people that aren't data scientists or that are non-technical. And that to me is the exact same thing. I'm taking in, again, 5 to 10 books, all these podcasts, and I have to make it usable to a listener in a few hours. So to me, that is one of the most useful skills you can have anywhere, is how do you condense, consolidate, pull out the most useful things that are targeted at solving a specific problem. And the best data scientists that I know do that very elegantly. Is they can take something that is unbelievably complex and explain it to an end user, explain it to someone who is going to be a part of the process or overseeing it, or whatever it might be, in their terms, so they understand it and they can make whatever they're building useful to them.
Mm-hmm. Something that I'm very curious about is what it's like working with famous people. I nerd out when I talk to some of my guests that are like famous in the data space, and I'm like, oh, I get to have them on my podcast as a guest, such as yourself. And I couldn't even imagine like a famous person, like getting them on as a guest on my podcast. So what is it like, so I can prepare to have a real huge famous person on my podcast in the future?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say it's no different. I mean, most of the people that are famous, they're famous for doing one thing really well: hitting a golf ball, shooting a basketball, whatever it might be. That doesn't make them fundamentally different than anyone else. It just means that they're really good at this one thing, and society attaches a lot more celebrity or notoriety to that one thing. The funny thing is, there's probably many people that I know are that caliber of data scientist or engineer, and they don't get celebrated in the same way. And to me, that means that you treat people that have a lot more what we call quote unquote fame. They just want to be treated the same. They don't want anything different. I mean, because I do work with a reasonable amount of high profile athletes in my work. I mean, a big thing that we do, that I believe in, and as a company we believe in, is that you never take pictures with your clients. You never you never really act like a fan, because you'd rather be respected by these people than to have a picture with them. That has never made sense to me. I'd rather be peers with professional athletes, look at them as friends, view them as people that I can confide in, or they can confide in me, be able to create value for them in that way, rather than have this fleeting moment where they won't remember me at all, outside of just another autograph or another picture that they've taken. Maybe there's some ego in there with me as well, where in anything that I do, I try to be the best in my craft. And I feel hopefully more akin to these people, where it's like they're the best at what they do. I am striving to be the best at what I do. They're not that different in that sense. The fact that they have more eyeballs or anything along those lines doesn't change the fact that we're both hopefully pursuing the pinnacle of our individual crafts. And that should put us on the same level in terms of being able to have a conversation, in terms of being able to have mutual respect and things along those lines. So, again, fame or notoriety, these are all constructs, and just treating people like they're your friends, or treating them like they're not famous, can also be just a breath of fresh air, because it can get tiring. I mean, even if I go to a data science convention or something like that, of course, I don't mind taking pictures. I don't mind talking to people. But if people come up to me and want to have a genuine conversation, even if they know who I am, whatever it is, I always really enjoy. I really enjoy those. If people are just coming up to get a picture, that's fine. I don't mind at all. And I'm by no means the same level of fame. But everyone is looking for more genuine human connection, rather than sort of passing transactional behaviors.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. So Ken's just my best friend. That's why he's on the podcast.
There you go. Well, we are friends. That is why I'm on the podcast.
We are. And when we met last month already, this month still, I don't know time anymore. when we met, I felt the same thing. Like all of these people, all of these creators came together, and it was like you see these faces, on LinkedIn and whatnot, and you're like, oh my gosh, I get to meet them in real life. And then you sit down and have those genuine conversations, and you're like, oh wow, like we're more alike than you had originally thought, where you have the same struggles, you have the same aspirations, and you can give each other these advices and whatnot. And so the genuine conversations really do bring out the best in people.
Yeah, I completely agree. And humans are all humans. It's all, it's like, oh, how are you doing? How's this thing you're working on? How's the family? How are those types of things? Athletes are no different. They just have careers. They just have that are more public than what ours are.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all athletes outside of the super high profile one live very similar lives, except probably with a little bit more money than normal people. But with the way data scientist salaries are looking, you never know.
True. Outside of all of this podcasting and data, do you have any other hobbies that kind of like relate to data?
That relate to data? Obviously, I'm very intentional with my health and my like performance tracking and things along those lines. That's a big interest of mine. I still play a little bit of golf when I can. I got really into jiu-jitsu as well. I was trying to compete. I actually had shoulder surgery a couple months ago, and I'm recovering from that. So hopefully I can get back in and start training again when that all heals. But all of my life isn't necessarily ruled by data, but it's related to data. I wouldn't say necessarily the data itself or the collection, but the thinking associated with everything I do is, I believe, to be highly analytical. So when I'm training, I'm trying to look at the way that I can do it the most efficient way while also enjoying it and maximizing that. And so what are the key metrics that I would evaluate performance as well as enjoyment on? So those are constant things that are always circling my head when I'm doing anything. And I also, with the podcasting and content in my work, there's only so much we can do, and I also have to spend time with my girlfriend and make sure that we're getting quality time there as well. So I think that at a high level, analytics or an analytical thinking approach is the backbone for how I approach everything, and that gives me a lot more freedom to be able to fit a lot of things in and to do them hopefully well and effectively. I have had to drop quite a few things. I try not to do as many speaking engagements anymore. Those take a lot of time. They take travel. They take preparation that don't necessarily have the highest return for me. So I'm also not making as many YouTube videos. I actually yesterday released a content about how, at least in the interim, I'm moving on from my Kenji YouTube channel and focusing more specifically on podcasting as sort of the main thing. And that's because I realized that I didn't have necessarily the time or energy or the enjoyment for those individual videos as much as I've developed in my career and as I've developed as a person. And that's been hard, but that introspection, that analytical approach is something that has 100% fed me being happier, as well as, again, hopefully doing things better.
That's good. Something that I ask all my guests is, how do you like to learn new things? So is it kind of the same approach to you training for, say, your jiu-jitsu?
It depends. So I like diving in and getting my hands dirty without a doubt. But if I really hyper analyze myself, I like to get some foundation first. So let's say I'm building a shelf from IKEA. I read the directions before I start putting stuff together, without a doubt. If there's a roadmap, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. But I also think it's really important to pull out all the pieces and see what they look like. So my process, again, for putting together a shelf or a desk, so I'll unbox it all. I'll line up all the pieces and look at them and see how they might fit together. And then I'll read the directions and then I'll start assembling. Right? I think that there's something very effective about doing that in any approach, whether it's data science, whether it's jiu-jitsu, whether it's anything you're trying to learn. The difference comes from how long someone might study the pieces before, or study the instructions before they start putting things together. I usually will not read the whole instruction booklet. I'll look at the instructions at a time and follow it along, and that works well for me. I think a lot of people, if we extend this metaphor even further in the data science domain, they study the coding language or the algorithms or all these things way too much up front before they start applying. They think they have to fully understand them before they use them. And I think that there is a sort of flywheel effect where you get some understanding and you apply, and that helps you to complete the understanding loop and to get things going more effectively on that front. So yes, in a very weird metaphorical way, that is generally how I approach learning.
That's a really great analogy. So do you like count all of the pieces to make sure that you have all of the screws that you need, or do you just go ahead and say, okay, there's screws, start screwing it in, and then notice that you're missing 2 screws at the end?
It's funny, this legitimately happened the other day, is that I was missing 2 screws, and it's a little shelf that goes behind our couch, and the two of the screws, well, we had the screws, but apparently in this Amazon product, they didn't include the things that the screws screw into at the bottom of the of like the foot of it, and so the thing is super crooked, and I had to figure out how to balance it after the fact. But that's the nature of it. And then there's more arithmetic. It's like, well, do I send it back? This like $80 thing. It's going to be this hassle that I have to build it again, and I'd have to take it apart to send it back and do all these things. And so I just decided to jury rig it myself. But that's how pretty much every project goes if we're thinking about engineering. Is, oh, it's not quite right. We have to create this cost benefit of, should we restart this whole thing? Should we just throw it away? Should we, order another one and just like try to give away this other one? Those are all fun parts of solving any problem. And I think that I solved it effectively. Just put some paper towel under there and created a little cap, and it worked okay.
Oh, amazing. Paper towels for the win, not duct tape.
No, I didn't have any duct tape. That would have been another trip to the store. So maybe I'm just realizing I'm kind of lazy, but who knows?
No, I love it. It just highlights like the problem solving skills that you need basically anytime you do anything in life.
Yeah, I mean, some of the most important skills to develop, in my opinion. And if you have some structure, you have some framework that you use to solve problems, I think that generally helps. And I think we all develop our own frameworks for solving problems over time. And that might be one of the greatest advantages that we have at a macro level as data scientists, that we have a lot of frameworks to be able to solve problems. But at a micro level, our individual framework that we create can be something that differentiates us in the job market or in an entrepreneurial endeavor or in any of these types of things.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a go-to framework, or is it just general situation by situation?
I generally have a go-to framework. I think that, maybe compared to, for example, my girlfriend, her framework is usually get her hands dirty right away. I usually think about the problem a little bit more. I think about some of the scenarios that could come out of doing things in different ways. And I try to choose the approach that is the highest probability based on the constraints that I have. So there's a little bit more pre-planning, a little bit more, maybe I'll save, and maybe it'll take a little bit more time up front, but it will solve me problems in the future. And there's inherent problems with that. Some people that go to action faster actually get stuff done. Some people that think too much about scenarios never get started. And so finding a balance between those, I think I've done a pretty good job at. I mean, again, let's take this new podcast. I thought about starting it for probably 3 months before I did. I talked to a ton of people. I got their feedback. I thought about what the actual interviews would be like. I thought about what the content would be like. But once I got started, I had to evolve it a little bit. I had to think about some constraints that I hadn't thought about. So, for example, if I'm interviewing people that are relatively high profile, I have to be more at the whim of their schedule. And getting a weekly episode out might be really hard if I have to travel to all these places because I want to do it in person and do that really effectively. So I said, well, I could do virtual ones, which I didn't really want to do, or I could have other content that is not interview based and be able to fill in episodes with that. And I figured that was a little bit more effective for me. So there's problem solving on the fly, but I think I thought about all the large, big picture structural problems of, okay, who is the audience? Uh, what is the format of the episodes? How do I do that? But again, individually striking that balance is something that is probably it's where the artistry comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. It's funny that you like when you're starting something new, you think about like, oh, how is this going to be structured? And then finally, when you take that leap and you start it, you're like, oh, okay, I need to change this entirely. Or you could like at least keep a little bit of piece, but a lot of it is restructuring because, at least for me, I'm learning based on doing things and then realize, oh, okay, well, in practicality, it's not how I originally pictured it.
Yeah, and another thing is learning from other people, and something that I love that founders podcast because you get to see one what made all these different founders, entrepreneurs, investors successful, but you also get to see the mistakes they've made. And I also look at that podcast because it's a case study for how to build a podcast. So if you're he basically reads a new biography or autobiography every week, talks about the experience of the founder, and then also creates these connections to all these other founders that he studied, right? And so to me, it sounds very similar to what I'm doing with sports, but I can see, okay, I can look at his branding, I can look at his approach to studying these things. Again, the approach is a little bit different because I'm doing more books and a little bit longer series on each athlete. But I can see, okay, is there a market for that? It seems like people really enjoy that for founders. He's done a couple athletes in there as well, and those episodes have done well. Maybe there's an appetite for this other type of content that I could produce that's solely focused on athletes. Are there interviews with athletes that are focused on performance? Not as many as I would have liked. A lot of the interviews that athletes do is focused largely on current events, asking about what's going on in the league. It's not about the keys to what makes them fundamentally successful. And to me, that would be one of the saddest things ever is if some of these great athletes in 20, 30 years, they pass away and no one has one studied what made them inherently successful, or two, no one has actually asked them about their process or created this very clear framework for what they did differently that we could all learn from. That's just lost knowledge that we'll never have. And through the analysis of the market in that way, I've come to, oh, this is a fairly unique thing that I'm doing in a fairly unique way, but there's enough other similar content that to me, there's a proof of concept that people would be interested in listening to this. So again, like not killing myself with research, but also looking deep enough to say, to analyze and think about if there's a good market or not for something along these lines.
Yeah. I'm so excited to see where this takes you with Exponential Athlete.
Thank you. I'm excited too. We'll find out, right?
Yeah. So, do you have any final words of encouragement or recommendations for the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, something that I've realized more recently is that we grow individually in the types of work that we do, the types of things that we're good at, and it's okay for your career to evolve over time. Again, the changes that I'm making now are very natural and good and positive changes for the way I've personally developed, as well as the way that the the market that I fit into has changed. The unique value that I can create is different now than it was 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. And by thinking about how you can uniquely create value, whether it's for a company or any of these types of things, combined with what you're inherently interested in, is where I believe you can find the most success in whatever that you choose to do. And if we take that maybe to a data scientist role, there's a type of analysis that you love. Maybe it's like inference or something along those lines, and you get really good at it and you super enjoy that, and companies need that. You're probably going to have a job for a while. And realizing that about yourself and realizing that maybe you won't love statistical inference in 3 years, but you might love something else and can completely immerse in it. But that statistical inference skill combined with whatever new skill you develop could be even more powerful or make you more unique is also a very useful thing. And you should embrace that change and be willing to grow with that change as well. So, again, maybe speaking very aggressively from the stage of my life and career that I'm at right now. But at the same time, to me, that's the truest message that I can also tell at this point.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Ken, so much again for coming on the show. If any of the listeners want to reach out to you, where can they find and or follow you?
LinkedIn is probably the best place. The two podcasts, Ken's Nearest Neighbors and The Exponential Athlete, are both on any podcasting platform. They're also both on YouTube in video format.
Amazing. Well, thank you
Thank you
again
so much
so
for
much.
having me, Monica. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for letting me gush about myself for an hour. I don't mind.
Oh, for sure. All right. As always, folks, happy learning.